Did you ever really mean to do something and never quite got around to it? Yeah, that's this video and the one that follows. If you ever see something that you think I've missed, make sure you let me know, and I'll try my hardest to circle around and get to it. So, want to talk about the problem of evil some more? Here we go. Way back in 2018, I did a video called The Problem of Evil Part 1. It was over on the William Lane Craig channel, and it was the first of a two-part video series, I guess, and for some reason, I never went back and did the other video. I don't even remember at this point if I ever intended to, but kind viewer and long-time subscriber Suskind, and please let me know if I mispronounced that, let me know about it, and it went into my list of things I would do eventually, and it kind of got lost. So recently I went back and I looked at it thinking, well, maybe I had started to do the video and just never finished. But that wasn't the case. They were two entirely separate videos. I did the first one, never went back and did the second one. So I'm going to rectify that today with the first part of a two-part look at William Lane Craig's, or whoever did it, whoever's voice this is, their second video, Suffering and Evil Part 2. The probability version. So, with all that out of the way, hope you enjoy.
In part 1, we looked at the logical version of the problem of suffering and evil.
Which I already did, and I'll provide a link in the description to that video if you want to go back for a refresher. It wasn't very logical, but let's get back to this video and see where it goes.
This argument attempts to show that since suffering and evil exist, it is logically impossible for God to exist.
And here, I'm going to at least have to address it, right? It's not logically impossible for a God to exist, only the God that you've made up in your heads and invented this ludicrous laundry list of arbitrary characteristics to just staple onto it. It's not like no God could possibly exist, given what we see in the world around us. An evil God could exist. An apathetic God could exist. A non-creator God could exist. However, when you take the Christian version, and this goes for other versions of gods as well from other religions, but they all have the same basic formulation for said God, you know, the omniproperty yada yada thing, that God is not possible, given the characteristics arbitrarily assigned and the world that we see. These two things do not go together. These two things just do not belong.
And we explained why even atheist philosophers admit that this argument fails.
Not so much. Of course, you'd have to go watch the other video to get all the details, and that's just where I'm going to leave it. Otherwise, this is just going to be ridiculously long. Longer than it already looks like it's going to be. So, anyway, if you want to go watch the other video, links in the description. Otherwise, onward.
But wait! It may still be argued that while it's logically possible that God and suffering both exist, it's far from likely.
It's still not logically possible, given the imaginary father figure in the sky that you people have just made up in your heads. That is just not going to work. However, when you're talking about likely, well, that's another matter entirely, and hopefully he'll get to that soon. Likelihood is based on truth, and as we all know, there just isn't any demonstrable truth in the biblical narrative when it comes to God. It's like asking, how likely is it that Harry Potter killed Voldemort? Likely in the books? Sure. Likely in reality? No, not a chance. This is where the religious are going to go wrong, as they always do. I just have a premonition. They are going to say that God must be real, but you don't get there with mere assertions, you have to get there with evidence. Faith doesn't mean a thing. So let's hopefully get on with it.
There's just so much pointless suffering, it seems improbable that God could have good reasons for permitting it.
And that's the problem that the religious have right there. They assume that God has good reasons, they just can't explain what any of those good reasons might happen to be. That's like saying, well, Hitler must have had good reasons for doing what he did. Okay, what were they? Who knows? But they must have been good reasons because we say so. If you can't explain what those reasons are and why they're good, then it's just an empty claim, and the religious are full of those, aren't they? I think even this early on, you can see all of the unwarranted assertions and assumptions that the religious are just stuffing into the video. 1, that God exists. That's just an assertion. 2, that God is anything at all like they claim that he is. Well, how do you know that and how do you prove it? 3, that God having a good reason matters. Saying, well, there must have been a good reason for the Rwandan genocide. That doesn't make it a good thing. It's not defensible no matter what the reason might have been. And of course, the religious are terrified of their imaginary friend, so they will do as abused wives do, pointing to their black eyes and saying, but he loves me. They are going to assume the best of their imaginary friend, no matter how evil it is. Now, Craig and whoever is narrating this, I have no idea, it doesn't say in the video description, they are going to assume that their God is however they want their God to be. But of course, that doesn't actually mean anything, does it? But anyway, let's continue.
This is the probability version of the problem. Suffering provides empirical evidence that God's existence is not impossible, just highly unlikely.
You haven't even gotten to the point where we can even judge the likelihood of the claim yet. You can go right back to the Harry Potter example. Well, the possibility of Harry Potter killing Voldemort in the real world is highly unlikely. So, because I don't care about likelihood, I care about truth. I care about how we get to demonstrable, verifiable fact from, well, it sounds good to me. And I've got a feeling that this video isn't going to get you anywhere remotely close to that, but I guess we'll see, won't we?
Is this a good argument? Consider 3 points. First, we are not in a position to say with any confidence that God probably lacks reasons for allowing the suffering in the world.
We are not in any position to say that God exists at all. This is the point that they don't want to talk about. Well, assuming God is real, no, I'm not going to assume that God is real. You have to prove that part. That's the very basis upon which everything else rests. This is exactly why these videos are not being made for a skeptical atheist audience, because we are not going to take all of the Christian preconceptions as gospel truth. This is something that we can never, ever let them get away with. This is why they gish gallop. They are so desperate to get past all of their bald preconceptions, and that's where the entire problem lies. Well, of course God is real means no more than, well, of course Harry Potter is real. It says so in a book. Okay, so what? Now, you could go to Hitler. We know Hitler was real. We can prove that the things that are said about Hitler actually happened. That work has already been done. That's not the case with God, though, and that's why we just can't let them rush past it. Prove God first. Because if you can't, there is absolutely no discussion to be had.
The problem is that we're limited in space and time, and in intelligence and insight. God, on the other hand, sees every detail of history from beginning to end.
Says who? Oh, I know that you believe it, but believing it doesn't really mean anything, does it? I'm sure that somewhere out there must be fanatical Potterheads, if there are actually any that believe this, which would be kind of dumb, but you never know. They could say the exact same thing about Harry Potter. Well, you can't see the magical realm because you've never been to Hogwarts. It would be the same kind of thing, and we'd have the same kind of answer. Prove it. Again, they just don't want to talk to us because we ought to be pointing this stuff out, and the people they want to talk to, they never do. These are the foundational myths of Christianity, and they are just that, myths. They are myths until they can be independently validated, and I wouldn't be holding my breath on that happening anytime soon. And no, I don't think that we should be agreeing just for the sake of argument. I think they're counting on people doing exactly that, and I think that's a really, really bad idea. Do not let bad ideas fly. Stop them the second they come up and demand rational justification. It's going to end up with a lot of aborted conversations, but so what? Bad ideas are bad ideas. Do not ever let them pass.
And orders it through people's free decisions and actions. In order to achieve his purposes, God may have to allow a great deal of suffering along the way.
Why? Because the way that you've designed this deity, that is simply not the case. When you have all knowledge and all power, then may have to means absolutely nothing. God can do anything, literally anything, possible or not. God can stack the deck with any cards he wants, even cards that he just makes up on a whim. There are no limitations, because the second that you introduce limitations, you've changed your definition for God. You know, that definition that you just can't justify in the first place. What they're really doing reminds me of the reason that I walked away from reading fantasy books. Now, I remember exactly where and when and what book did it, but I'm not going to say because it tends to piss off fans of the series and it doesn't really matter. But there was a point in the book where I realized that the author had written themselves into a corner. And I figured that instead of going back and fixing the things before publication, they decided on the fly to just redesign their entire magical system so that what they were doing now made sense if you had no memory of the past couple hundred pages. Now, I realize that a lot of fantasy authors are doing the same thing, changing things in the middle because it's a whole lot easier than being consistent, and I want consistency, so I decided to just walk away. Now, that doesn't mean I've walked away from all fantasy. I still read the Harry Potter books. There are a few I get here and there, but for the vast majority, I don't read them at all anymore. In most of the things that I still read, I still have to go, hey, wait a minute, when they leave the consistent world that they've set up, because it's a whole lot simpler than fixing the problem. That's why I don't let them fly, and neither should you. It's a whole lot easier if you're trying to get to the truth.
Suffering which appears pointless within our limited scope of understanding may be seen to have been justly permitted by God within his wider framework.
Maybe. And why would you think that? And you'll notice the religious pulling that a lot. Well, it could be theoretically possible, kind of, maybe, I don't know. If you look at it from a certain point of view, why the hell not? But see, I'm not interested in what you think could happen. I am interested in what you demonstrate does happen. And I don't care about your little pie-in-the-sky nonsense. I care what you can prove is true. And that goes all the way back to proving that your imaginary friend is real to begin with. But given the fact that you cannot remotely show that a god of any kind is even possible, much less likely, all the possibility crap just goes right out the window. Because it's just that. Crap. What is the probability that Harry Potter actually killed Voldemort in the real world? And how do you even begin to calculate that? You'd have to start off with the preconception that Harry Potter or a god or whatever even exists in the first place. And that is not a well-justified position, is it? Therefore, until you can provide some kind of coherent, credible reason to think that your starting propositions are true, or likely to be true, then the rest of it is a complete waste of time. It all comes down to, because I say so. And that is not at all impressive.
Sometimes what we experience makes no sense until we gain a wider perspective and see the big picture designed by the Creator.
That's just an assertion, though. It is assuming that there is another perspective available without providing any reason to think that that's actually true. Worse, the religious are asserting that they know the details, at least in the broad strokes. Well, God had to have a good reason. Says who? Maybe God's a dick. They don't want to believe that, but as we know, wanting to believe something means exactly jack. Your fee-fees don't matter. So for all of these things that are just being stated confidently, they can present no verifiable reason that they should be confident at all. It's just faith, and faith is meaningless. You don't have rational debates based on faith. You don't get two people up on a stage with one saying, well, I have faith that there are aliens, and the other one saying, well, I have faith that there aren't. No, it all comes down to the evidence, and the evidence here is painfully lacking.
Here's the second point. Relative to the full scope of the evidence, God's existence may well be probable.
May well be. See, it's all these wiggle words that get the religious into trouble, because by the same sentiment, God's existence may be improbable or impossible. It may well be. These are just words that tumble out of their mouths that have no meaning whatsoever. The time to believe that a thing is true is when you have the evidence to back it up at hand, and not one instant before. God is real. Can you prove it? Well, no, but then come back when you can. Until then, I see no good reason to change my mind. And any religion can do this, right? Just swap out God for anything else you like. Relative to the full scope of the evidence, invisible, intangible, universe-creating Pixie's existence may well be probable. Yeah, but how is that any different than what he just said? It's not. Yet because he really wants to believe in one and not in the other, he's going to insist that his pet belief is true and the others are false just because. Yeah, that's not how logic works, is it?
You see, probabilities are always relative to background information.
And you actually have to have that background information in order to make worthwhile determinations. Saying, well, it could be out there somewhere, that means absolutely nothing. Our ability to judge is inherently limited by what we currently know in the moment. In this moment, right here, right now, there is absolutely no good reason to think that any gods are real. Therefore, only an idiot believes that they do.
For example, if we consider only how much this man weighs, we would say it's highly improbable that he's a world-class athlete. But when we're willing to consider new information, that he's a professional sumo wrestler and a world champion, we quickly revise our view.
Hey, I saw that one coming a mile away. How about you? Yet here you have a real person that you can tell actual things about through observation. You can put them on a scale. You can just look at them and see what they're like. You can make real-world determinations about their characteristics objectively. Now, how do you do any of that with God? Not what you want to believe about God, since what you believe means absolutely nothing, but how can you prove anything? What observations can you actually make? And the answer, of course, is nothing. It's all fee-fees and faith, and that is entirely irrelevant. What they're really saying is, well, listen to my unsupported stories about my imaginary friend and tell me what you think. Well, I think they're all unsupported stories, and until you can do something better to show that they're actually true or likely true or even possible to be true in the real world, I am going to file them away with all the other nonsensical stories that I've heard in my lifetime. You can't get from fantasy to reality without evidence. Where's yours?
In the same way, when the atheist claims that God's existence is improbable, we should ask, improbable relative to what background information?
Everything that we can demonstrate is actually real. This is where the religious are always going to run into trouble. Well, Harry Potter is real according to the background information of the books. But the books are all just made up. Well, you can't prove that. Sure we can. We can go back to the author who is going to tell you that she just made it all up. We can look at all the characteristics of the books and find them incredibly similar to other books that are also demonstrably made up. These are just stories that have not been independently validated to be otherwise. Come on back when you've got something more than your say-so, because you will never see these people again.
If we consider only the suffering in the world, then God's existence may very well appear to be improbable.
May very well. I mean, just listen to these people. Listen to the words that they use. The second that you see it, it will be impossible to unsee. Well, it could be. So what? Could be's don't matter. Harry Potter could be real. There are lots of people out there named Harry Potter in the real world. You can't prove that Hogwarts isn't real, so you can't say that it's improbable that one of those Harry Potters didn't just go to school there. That is the level of nonsense that the apologists spew. It's just dumb.
But if we're willing to look at the full scope of background information, to take into account the powerful arguments for God's existence, we may come to a very different conclusion.
Except we don't, because all of that is crap. We've taken them all apart. This is what happens when you try to overwhelm people with religious bullshit. There is absolutely nothing there of any consequences, and 10 small piles of crap don't smell any better than one gigantic one. We have gone through every single one of these arguments many, many times, and we have disproven every single one of these arguments many, many times. If the religious were honest, then they'd stop throwing them at the wall and hope they stick. They are all just a messy smear at this point. You've got to do a whole lot better than that. At least try.
The third point is, Christianity entails doctrines that increase the probability of the coexistence of God and suffering.
But I don't care what your doctrines say until you can prove that your doctrines and beliefs are true. A while back now, by the time this comes out anyhow, I did a video where one group of Christians was complaining about another group of Christians because they didn't agree with their doctrines. Well, so what? Because doctrines are irrelevant if they are not demonstrably so. This is just, my book says a thing and I really, really, really want it to be true. Neither of which gets you anywhere worthwhile. So we'll continue, but keep this in mind because this point isn't going to do a thing for the religiously delusional.
Consider 4 of these. First, the chief purpose of life is not happiness.
There is no inherent purpose for life. Get over yourself. You are here because your parents, well, I hope you know what they did. That's it. It's up to you and the culture that you live in to determine what you can do and what you can't do and what you want to do while you're here. Welcome to the real world. This is just mistaken up front. Let's let him get through the rest of his spiel, though, because I don't think it's going to get him anywhere intelligent.
People often assume that if God exists, his role is to create a comfortable environment for his human pets. They think the ultimate goal of our lives on earth is happiness, and therefore, God is obligated to keep us happy.
And they're wrong. Granted, there are a lot of atheists out there who are after human flourishing, and they're wrong too, but at least I guess they're trying to do something about it most of the time. I think it's a decent goal, even though it isn't one that we're ever going to meet entirely. That's just the way life goes. Now, it depends on which version of Christianity that you're following. 40-something thousand distinct sects and all that, you know. However, a lot of the more liberal versions, they are all happy, happy, joy, joy about it, right? And there are plenty of the more fanatical side, on the more fundamentalist side, who follow prosperity gospel nonsense, mostly because it makes the pastor money. So I guess it's all spread around pretty evenly. Of course, that's all entirely irrelevant, because that isn't the actual world that we live in. Humans aren't special. We're just animals in a universe that doesn't care if we exist at all. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
However, Christianity presents a radically different view, that the purpose of life is to know God.
Not all of it, as I said, and certainly not to know God, but to kiss God's ass. If we're going to be honest about it, and we should be, it's to provide for the church as God's official representatives, which starts to look like a gigantic scam when you start to think about it. Christianity invents a problem and then proposes an ad hoc solution that cannot be verified, but they sure want the contents of your wallet, don't they? I wouldn't say if Christianity and other religions didn't continually ask for your money, but they do. All of them do. If there was zero profit motive, then maybe they wouldn't catch so much flack, but, you know.
This alone brings true, lasting fulfillment. Suffering can bring about a deeper, more intimate knowledge of God, either on the part of the one who is suffering or those around him.
And we hear that all the time. Well, sure, you've got cancer and you're in constant agony, but God has a plan for your life. That again is a giant con job. This God of yours is a prick, because no matter what happens, they can find a way to spin it so that Christianity comes out on top. God is your bestest buddy, even if he's torturing you for all eternity. And I'm not sure how much sense that makes, but these are not rational people, are they?
The whole point of human history is that God, having given us free will, is drawing as many people as he can into his unending kingdom.
And there's that ridiculous free will claim. If God is the way that most Christians describe him, then free will is a myth. Free will is defined as the ability to do otherwise. Once God knows everything and can't possibly be wrong, which is how he's usually defined, then free will, even the illusion of free will, goes right out the window. There is no ability to do what God hasn't already foreseen. We're just playing by a script that God already knows, and no matter what we do, we're all saved or damned long before we were even born. Of course, most Christians don't like that, other than the Calvinists, but that's an entirely different matter. At least they're being honest about it, even though the whole idea is stupid. No, they come up with all kinds of bald rationalizations, and it is ever so simple to back them into a corner and point out that their rationalizations are just bullcrap. And then they run away. Big surprise there.
Suffering is one of the ways God can draw people freely to himself. In fact, countries that have endured the most hardship often show the highest growth rates for Christianity.
That is not a good thing, because these are people who have the least amount of hope. They are relying on the most absurdly unsupported ideas that they can because they don't have anything else. It's why religion is dying in the first world, where most people don't have to get on their knees and hope that they're going to eat today. The countries with strong economies and educational systems, they have very, very little use for Christianity or most other religions. This is why organized religion preys on the needy and the hopeless, because they know those are the only people who might fall for it.
God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our consciences, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world.
Well, I think we all know how little I think of C.S. Lewis. He was just another shyster for the Lord, which describes pretty much all strongly religious people out there, especially apologists. They are just more con men with their hands out for your money. Still, I think this is a good place to stop for the day before this gets too ridiculously long. We'll pick it up again next week with his second point, and I suspect it's not going to be any better than the first. Granted, none of this is being made for us because they don't care what we think. They don't care about us. We're just boogeymen in their own overactive imaginations because we can watch this stuff and just roll our eyes, whereas the people they're really making it for, they can't. It's really dumb, and they have no hope at all of making money from us, so they just rather talk about us or at us or whatever. Anything instead of talking to us. If they actually talked to us, maybe had a solid back and forth conversation, then they might learn something, and they certainly don't want to do that. So set your calendars for next week, and we'll come back and finish this off. Let me know down in the comments if you think they had any real good points, because I can't see any. Granted, I wasn't really expecting to. This is William Lane Craig's channel after all, but who knows? Maybe I missed something. Let me know what you think. And while you're down there, if you see SUPERCUT, or however you pronounce that, sorry, give him a thank you for booting me in the butt and making me get back to this. I appreciate it. So anyway, until next week, take care. The bald rationalizations that the religious go through to get back to their emotionally comforting faith is just absurd. But we know that already, right? They don't talk to us because we just point out all of their problems, and that's too emotionally distressing. Therefore, they just make up nonsense in their heads. It's a whole lot easier than just thinking critically. So anyway, away we go. Welcome back to part 2 of the Problem of Evil video on William Lane Craig's channel. Thanks once again to SUPERCUT for reminding me that I never got to it, and I just apologize for taking so long. That said though, this is going pretty much how I expected it to. Lots of empty claims and no evidence of any kind because, as we all know, the religious just don't care. So let's launch into the last part where whoever this is, they never say, shows us why Christianity, at least the brand practiced by Craig and others like him, is so damn dumb. And I trust nobody will be surprised by that. Let's get into it.
Second, mankind is in a state of rebellion against God and his purpose.
Says who? Because the only people who are likely to bring up the problem of evil in the first place are atheists. And atheists are not going to take any of this doctrinal and ideological nonsense seriously. This is how you know that they're not making any of this stuff for us. They are preaching to the choir, which granted are the only people who are likely to give them any money or buy into any of this crap, so I guess that's not unexpected. Christian apologetics is all about reinforcing the beliefs of people who already believe in Christianity. It has nothing at all to do with proving any of it is remotely true. And that's kind of a problem, wouldn't you say? It also seems to be a terrible tactic because if you're not actively trying to convince the non-believers, not only are you failing in the Great Commission, but from a more practical and realistic standpoint, they're losing out on potentially even more money for all the new converts that they might make who tend to be more fanatical than the old guard is. So either they know they've got nothing at all to convince the opposition and they're not even trying, or this is all just a scam. Let me know which one you think it is down in the comments, or maybe you think it's something else entirely. Let me know.
Terrible human evils are testimony to man's depravity, a consequence of his alienation from God.
But that's not even what the problem of evil addresses. Mostly, it's talking about natural disasters, disease, things that are entirely beyond the control of humanity. Are we supposed to think that the weather is a filthy sinner? Of course, the religious often use natural disasters to claim that God is punishing mankind for his sins, which of course just makes God a dick. An even bigger dick than normal, I mean. It proves that the omnibenevolent label is not one which they can logically apply to their imaginary friend. Their response, at least typically, is, well, God put you into this world, he can take you out. So now God is an abusive father figure in the sky. I mean, none of this actually helps their case, does it?
The Christian isn't surprised at moral evil in the world. On the contrary, he expects it.
Of course, he does this because his entire theology is based on it. That doesn't make any of it true. This is what happens when you start with conclusions and then have to work backwards, which is what most religions tend to do. Most of these claims are just bald rationalizations designed to confirm the things that they already believe on faith. that also doesn't prove that any of it is true. It's why when Christians, and to be fair, other theists as well, claim that they are being persecuted, all you have to do is look into their holy books and find where it says they're going to be, because this is just confirmation bias. Then they just automatically interpret any hardship or opposition as persecution so that they can feel better about the crap that they believe. People telling you that you're wrong when you're wrong, that's not persecution, that's reality. Get a grip.
The third doctrine states that God's purpose is not restricted to this life, but spills over beyond the grave into eternal life.
Something that, sadly, you can't prove is real. Again, no atheist who is likely to be asking about the problem of evil is going to be taking any of this faith and fifi talk seriously, nor should they. It's why we have to hit them up front before they go running down the primrose path into insanity. It's why they don't want to talk to us unless they have complete control over the venue. Otherwise, they just look dumb. Mostly because they are.
This world is just the beginning, the entryway to an unimaginable, never-ending life beyond death's door.
Says you. Now, prove it. Because that's something else that a lot of people, religious and otherwise, don't seem to understand. Just because you make a claim, that doesn't make that claim valid. It's why we rely on evidence to see which claims are actually more likely to be true and which are just the product of overactive imaginations and flapping lips. This is something that I say all the time, but it bears repeating. I don't care about your beliefs. I care what's actually going on in factual reality. I care how you can get there, how you can prove it without relying on faith. If there actually is a real existing God out there somewhere, I will believe it once you can actually support it with direct, demonstrable evidence, and not until. My feelings don't matter, and neither do yours. And I think it's pretty widespread among a lot of atheists, or at least where it applies to religious claims, which is why they don't really want to have a back and forth conversation with actual atheists. They only want to talk to people who already believe the things that they do, because we're going to ask all the questions that they have no answers to. We're going to point out all the empty claims that they're making, and they don't like that. It's a whole lot easier to just appeal to people who already believe and really aren't that interested in the facts. Those people are gullible, and we generally are not.
Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, underwent afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, hunger. Yet he wrote, "We do not lose heart, for this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Because we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal."
Yep, your book says a thing. Most of those things are completely unsubstantiated, just held because of church tradition, with no independent corroboration whatsoever. Now, granted, I'm not really going to complain because undergoing hardships, if all of that actually happened, that doesn't make any of the claims in the Bible true. People believe things for bad reasons and have all kinds of bad things happen, but that doesn't affect the actual validity of their beliefs whatsoever. It just plays into the torture porn narrative of Christianity, and that doesn't change anything, no matter how much they seem convinced that it does.
Paul understood that life on earth and whatever suffering it holds for each of us is temporary. Our pain will not endure forever, but our lives with God will.
Again, that's your story, but that doesn't make your story true. Everything in this video so far has just been Christian story time, and that's pretty much all they have in their arsenal. Whether they like it or not, that doesn't impress us, nor should it impress them. But they aren't really doing this for the facts, only for the faith. We, unfortunately for them, We are in it for the facts and we don't care about the faith. It's why they spent so much time talking past us or about us instead of with us. And that's kind of sad, right?
Paul was not belittling the plight of those who suffer horribly in this life. Indeed, he was one of them. But he saw that those sufferings will be overwhelmed forever by the ocean of joy that God will give to those who will freely receive it.
He believed a thing that he couldn't demonstrate, and he, at least according to tradition, suffered because of it. Well, lots of people do that, don't they? The 9/11 hijackers all gave their own lives willingly because they thought they'd get a bunch of virgins after death. But that doesn't make it true. We can find tons of examples of this throughout history. Lots of dead Heaven's Gate cult members, lots of dead Jim Jones followers, lots of dead Branch Davidians, all of whom died believing that they were going to a better place. It's just that, as far as we can tell, they were all wrong. They died for nothing. They suffered for nothing. And whether Christians like it or not, Paul and other martyrs, they probably did too. This is where faith and fifis get in the way of a simple acknowledgement of reality. And that again is why they aren't talking to us, because they really just want to believe.
And the fourth doctrine is this: the knowledge of God is an incomparable good.
Says who? I mean, I understand that you believe that, but belief isn't knowledge unless you can back it up in some kind of demonstrable way. That is where we have so many problems, because the religious, and to be fair, a lot of people who aren't as well, they are relying on fifis and faith and don't want to face the world without them. This is exactly why I stop every single theist and ask how they know that. Not what they want to be true, what is actually true. How do you prove it to somebody who doesn't already believe the things that you believe? Because this is the very basis of the scientific method, getting rid of as many preconceived notions as possible to get down to what is actually going on in the real world. This is why people like Low Bar Bill lower the bar for their religious beliefs, because they just want it to be true. They don't really care if it actually is. You have to reach a point where you care. And that's why the religious fail so often.
Knowing God is the ultimate fulfillment of human existence, an infinite good.
Again, says who? Oh, I know it makes you feel good, but that doesn't actually get you anywhere. This is the problem of hard solipsism. We are inherently trapped inside of our meat suits, with only our senses to tell us what's going on around us. That assumes that our senses can be trusted. It assumes that what we receive is real, and there's absolutely no way to verify that independently. It's like watching Whose Line Is It Anyway? I mean, the good British version. You see them up on stage going through the motions, but they're not actually doing anything. Oh, well, I built a machine that will tell us what's really going on. Great. How do you know that? How do you know that you built it when you only have your own senses to tell you things, and those senses could be wrong? Worse, what do you think you're going to use to interpret the data from the machine? What can you evaluate it with except your already questionable senses? A lot of people get really uncomfortable at the thought, but that's really the reality that we have. We just make up a baseline, something pretty arbitrary, on what we're going to call reality because we have to call it something. Otherwise, everything is pretty pointless. If you question all of your senses, then it all falls apart because I can't even ask you what you're sensing because I have to rely on my own senses to receive the answer. I can't even prove you're real. I can't even prove I'm real. This is why philosophy has struggled with this forever and probably always will, because we just can't get out of our own heads.
Thus, the person who knows God, no matter how much he has suffered, can still say, God is good to me. So, if Christianity is true, it's not at all improbable that suffering and evil should exist.
If is not because. Now, leaving aside all of the solipsism stuff, since that's a rabbit hole down which no rational mind can enter and certainly none can escape, it becomes very obvious what's going on here. This is just, but I really want to believe. And that doesn't actually get you anywhere. Wanting to believe means nothing. It's why we ask for evidence, not belief, not faith, evidence. It is an effort to get out of your own head, at least as much as you can get there and into the real world. Just because you look around and see gods everywhere, that doesn't mean anything any more than if you saw pink elephants everywhere. I'm not asking what you see. I'm not asking what you interpret. I'm asking how you justify your beliefs in some demonstrable way, and the religious, sadly, can't do that. It's why they have so many problems.
In summary, for all these reasons, the probability version of the problem of evil is no more successful than the logical version.
Only because you're looking at the problem of evil wrong. Now, I've said this many times, but as far as I'm concerned, and this is just me, but the problem of evil has nothing at all to do with the actual existence of God and everything to do with the arbitrary characteristics that Christians have just assigned to their magical imaginary friend in the sky. It all comes down to, well, God is like this. How do you know that? Because that is a fair question and one that has to be asked. How do they know what their God is actually like, absent faith and fifis? I don't care about your faith and fifis. If you are asserting an actual God, a real existing God, then I need to see what your actual God is like. I need to see the evidence so that I can fairly evaluate it. If you can't provide a way that I, as a non-believer, can learn about your actual God, then the conversation is over. This is like talking about Pokemon. Well, Pikachu is real. Really? How do you know that? This is what Pikachu is like. Okay, and how do you know that? How do you get there without playing the games or watching the cartoons or whatever else you're doing? Because how did the people who made those things, if we're going to assume that any of this is real, how did they know anything? These people don't have any answers, only assertions, and assertions don't mean a damn thing.
As a purely intellectual problem, then, the problem of evil does not disprove God's existence.
Nor does it try to. Of course, this entire video is just stupid hand-wavium meant to confirm what the believers already want to believe is true. None of these videos are being made for us because we ask too many difficult questions, like I have done this entire way through. Those are worthwhile questions, though, things that the religious just don't want to evaluate, which again is why they don't want to talk to us, because we cause too many problems and they just don't like it. Sad, huh?
But even if those intellectual arguments fail, the emotional problem of suffering and evil remains very powerful.
But emotions don't matter, and I know I'll catch a lot of flack for that, but it's true. We live in the world that we live in, whatever world that actually seems to be. If you're not concerned with the actual existence or characteristics of that world, then what the hell are you doing? This is where religion goes sideways, because not only do they not care, they are actively trying to hide from reality because reality isn't the emotional happy land that they actually want. They are trying to get somewhere comforting, not real, and reality is all that matters. Again, it's why they don't talk to us, because we and our way of thinking, it's just too scary for them.
If you have suffered deeply, or if you've watched someone you love go through intense pain, you may be thinking, so what if God exists? Why would I want to respond to Him or worship Him? I feel cold and empty and want nothing to do with Him.
I only want anything to do with a God that actually exists. Reality is what reality is. If there is a God, then a God is real, and I want to know what is real. Now, sure, given a choice between a good God and an evil God, I'd personally prefer the good God, but my preferences don't really matter. It is what it is. If there is an evil God, like what it describes in the Bible, then that God is real. We have to learn how to deal with that. If no gods exist, as seems to be the case based on all the evidence that we have, then we need to learn how to deal with that too. You don't just get to define a comforting reality into existence because you really, really want it to be there. That is not how any of this works. Yet, for the religious, that's all they do, right? Because they have never grown up into the mature adults who can handle reality. And that's kind of pathetic, isn't it?
You're not alone. God knows your name. He knows who you are and what you're going through. God promises to be with you through your suffering. He can give you the strength to endure.
All of which are just empty claims. God is not demonstrably real. This is like saying, well, Santa Claus will bring you presents. And if that doesn't happen, they're full of excuses for why Santa just didn't come through. God is exactly the same way. It's a made-up idea that some people like because they are just too immature to set childish things aside. They would rather live in a fantasy world in their heads than to deal with the actual reality that, at least as best as we can determine, is really there. That's who these videos are being made for. Children. Tell me you don't see it too.
Jesus Christ also suffered. Although he was innocent, he was tortured and sentenced to death. His suffering had a purpose: to provide you and me with a life-giving connection to God.
That is the stupidest damn thing ever. I mean, the whole Bible is. God set up the entire system knowing that it would fail, and yet he did it anyway. Then he decided to sacrifice himself to himself so that he could create an exception to the rules that he himself made up so that modern-day Christians could feel better about the asinine things that they believe. I mean, how much more obvious can you be that this is all just a giant load of horse-puggy? Let me know in the comments if you think any of this is even remotely true.
Not only does God exist, but he loves you. He seeks after you. He offers you hope. And in time, he will make all things new.
Because we say so. We can't prove any of this, of course. You just have to believe. But sure, we'll make up a load of emotionally comforting nonsense because, well, we get paid to do it. Because this channel, Dr. Craig Videos, is monetized, and according to StarStat, he's made almost $50,000 this year alone, at least up to September when I'm writing this, and I don't think anybody should be surprised by that. It'll be more by the time this video hits YouTube, and that's a pretty good scam, don't you think?
He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.
And that, too, is just a claim. That's all any of this is. But you really want to believe it, right? No, not really, because I care what's actually going on. Beliefs mean nothing. Facts do. But the religious don't care about any of that. It's why conversations go nowhere, because we don't have the same goals in mind. They want comfort, I want fact. The two don't have a lot to do with each other, do they? Yet it's when people are willing to settle for comfort in the face of an uncomfortable truth that things start to go wrong. Now, yes, some of that is human nature, but humans have a choice. We can make uncomfortable decisions because they are the better option on the table. That's what I did way back when. I mean, I could have just made excuses and said, well, the Bible says a lot, and just ignore all the facts that I uncovered. Or I could go with the actual evidence. The evidence that showed that the Bible, Christianity, and ultimately all religions, they all had problems. The biggest of them was that none of them are demonstrably true. The moment that you commit yourself to the facts without regard for your feelings, that's when you get closer to actual reality. And I want to live in a world that is actually real, where I understand, at least to the best of my own ability, what is going on. It doesn't matter if that makes me happy or sad. Standing on the railroad tracks with a train barreling down on me, no matter how many happy thoughts I think, I'm still going to get splattered. No, I need to get off the track so I don't die. Happy thoughts or no. The religious are just standing on the tracks with a blissful look on their faces, waiting to get run over. Why? Because they're idiots. Because they are wasting the only life that they demonstrably get playing make-believe. Because the only life that we have isn't the utopia that they really want. Well, too bad. The only thing they're doing is proving to the world that they're morons. And if that's what you really want, count me out. I am far too mature to be a theist. Sadly, the same can't be said for everyone.